Welcome. Aloha, everybody. Aloha to those folks online here. Thanks for joining us for our December Slice of PI-CASC seminar hosted by the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center, or PI-CASC. See, folks have helped themselves to lunch. Folks online, if you ever get a chance to come in person, please do. We have lunch for each of these seminars. And we also have a pie afterwards, in keeping with our Slice of PI-CASC seminar, which Rachel has provided kindly again for us. So thank you, Rachel. I'm Brad Romine. I'm the University Consortium Deputy Director of PI-CASC. I'm happy to be your host today for this seminar, as usual. This Slice of PI-CASC seminar series provides a venue for sharing state-of-the-art climate adaptation research and science to management applications in Hawaii, the U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands, and beyond. This presentation is being recorded. It will be available on our PI-CASC website under News and Events. So want to go back and review it or share it with folks that couldn't make it today, please do share it around. For those of you joining us online, thanks for being here again. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentation. We will have time for questions following the presentation. Again, those online, feel free to leave the questions in the chat along the way or chime in at the conclusion of the talk. So today, we are very excited and pleased to have Dr. Melissa Price joining us today to share with us on transforming Hawaii from the endangered species capital of the world to the recovery capital. Dr. Price is an associate professor of wildlife ecology and management in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Management here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Melissa's research focuses on behavioral and molecular ecology, endangered species conservation, and wildlife decision analysis. Melissa works closely with federal, state, and local organizations on wildlife and endangered species management, climate change adaptation, behavioral ecology, population genetics and genomics, and decision making. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Price. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. All right, and just double checking, is everyone able to hear online now? I had gotten a message that folks couldn't hear, but we're good to go? Perfect, okay. And I just want to acknowledge a few folks before I share screen and can't see the folks online anymore. Dan Polhemus participated in some of the work I'm going to be presenting today. Let's see here. Steve Miller has been a longtime Kahuli guy, so glad to see you here too. So lots of folks, friendly faces online. Wonderful to see you here. Thanks so much for joining us. All right. So let's see if everything's working. Good to go? All right. Thanks so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. So I started work on Kahuli in 2012 for my postdoctoral fellowship. I did genetics, looking at population genetics and phylogenetics of about 59 populations across 25 species found on many of the islands across the Hawaiian Island chain. And to be able to do this work, we'd go up into the mountains, sit on the side of mountains while the team searched for the snails, brought them over, and then I'd take an itty bitty tiny non-lethal slice off of their tail to do the genetics work. In 2018, so I started this work in 2012. I last visited the population of these guys that you can see here, Acatenella lila, in 2015. And I got a call in 2018 from David Sisko, the Snail Extinction Prevention Program Coordinator, saying that they had gone up to evacuate this population because they were seeing many of the populations of tree snails blink out across the top of the mountains. And in 20 hours of searching with 4 people, they found 1 individual. And there had probably been at least 300 individuals in the population just a few years before. And so starting off early in my career, it highlighted how quickly things can change. I think it's no coincidence that given the way that the direction my work is headed, that I started out working on kahuli, which means to change or alter, or without the ka-ko means to overturn, overthrow, capsize, or upset. Sorry, just messing with Zoom a little bit here. And so if we look at Well, a few years later, we did some climate change models. Prior to this, we had thought that it was mostly predators that were impacting the Hawaiian tree snails, as well as land clearing historical practices over collection. We did climate change models, and I'll give you just the take-home message, which is if we look at the current distribution, which granted, these are very tiny ranges currently, and we look at the projected future ranges under climate change projections by end of century, and we presented this to David Sisko, and he said, actually, your end of century models are predicting today's distribution. So if you look at that far right column, you'll see that the species that are predicted to have no climate suitable area remaining by end of century are largely gone from the wild today. Those that are predicted to have some climate suitable habitat by end of century do remain in the wild today. And it's not just models. David Sisko's tried to put snails back out on the landscape in little protective cages that keep the invasive predators out. They do great in the wet winter months. As soon as you hit a drought month, they all keel over and die. So we have field-based evidence that this is a heavy climate change influence as well. So as David has said, we're anticipating the near total extirpation of approximately 10 entire genera, about 100 snail species within the next 1 to 10 years. This is not stuff that we've got 50 years of planning ahead of us. This is happening in real time. And so I started hearing around 2015, 16, 17, 18, these same stories from across species groups. And so we pulled together this large team of people, and you'll see experts who work on all types of terrestrial species. And so we looked across species groups and recognized that this was happening across multiple taxonomic groups. And so presented this at a number of spaces that you may have seen. The future is here, recent declines across multiple taxa in the Hawaiian Islands raise alarms. And so I'll give you just a brief overview of what we were seeing. So there's work that I'm sure you've seen by Lucas Fertini's team looking about how plants, there's over 100 no overlap species that are going to need a lot of assistance to get to climate suitable areas if they're going to persist into the future. And in fact, there are quite a few species that are blink out or wink out species that will not have climate suitable habitat in the future. And so there's very difficult decisions to be made about how to handle that and what to do about it. And arthropods depend upon those plant species. Many of the arthropod species we see decline, in part because they are completely dependent upon those plant species. So if the plant species disappear, so too do the arthropods that depend upon them. And the Hawaiian forest bird story is one that's perhaps more publicized, and so one that you're probably very familiar with. Models were predicting that there would be major declines by end of century, but what we're seeing, particularly in these 4 species, is declines occurring in real time. Akikiki are down to about two detectable individuals in the wild as of the end of this last breeding season. Iiwi, I feel a personal connection and loss regarding in that I could have seen them as a kid on Oahu. The last one was seen in 2013. So this is not just a recent thing, right? But this is something that's been happening. And on the taller islands, we're seeing the last remaining pockets of populations blink out. But we've seen this moving across the Hawaiian Islands as climate change has moved avian malaria higher and higher in elevation. And again, just highlighting that this was predicted in 2015, but we always model things as quote unquote end of century. And so I think it's a little bit, I don't know if misleading is the right word, but when we speak about it as end of century, I think it clouds over the fact that there's huge amounts of variation in how real biological organisms respond to change. And so while these were predicted to have dramatic range decreases by end of century, we're actually seeing many of these blink out today. So I think a lot about ho'okahuli. How do we create turning points, transformation, innovation, movement, and change, given these monumental challenges that we are facing in real time? We don't feel the luxury of time in preparing for these things because we're watching them happen in real time. So I gave my students in my seminar class the challenge of kind of mapping out the impact they want to have on the world and their pathway to getting there at the beginning of the semester. And so I presented similar talk to them last week and wanted to give myself the same challenge and kind of put together this slide that captures how I see the impact that I want to have over the next 40 years or so of my career. So it centers around Pilina, that loss of the tree snails that happened with that population, many of the populations along the top of the Ko'olaus. I felt just deeply emotionally that loss. It's hard to explain to normal people, but it felt like losing a family member. Each day as I drove over the Pali Highway and looked at the miles and miles of invaded forest, I didn't have, even though I couldn't obviously see the snails from driving the Pali or even the area where they were, just knowing that they were there before gave me this hope. And not having them there anymore, I didn't realize how much that would kind of devastate me for them not to be there anymore. And so as I think about restoring those tree snail populations and saving those tree snail populations, it's not just about restoring my own relationship with them and the ability to hike my kids out there someday to see those snails, which today I can't do. They were 1 and 3 years old when I was doing that sampling, and today they could hike themselves up there and actually remember seeing them, and they're gone, right? I don't get to show them in the wild today. It's not just about restoring that relationship that I might get to have or my children or grandchildren might get to have, but with Hawaiian people who had these relationships for 1,000 years, that loss is so much more deeply felt. And so the work that we do is not just about restoring our own ability to tell people about them, show them, but it's about restoring more broad community relationship with these species over time. And so my work is in these different areas, largely because I'm a wildlife biologist on the effective conservation action side, but it touches on all these other areas, and I'm gradually recognizing that to solve problems, I've got to shift more and more towards these other areas. So I want to talk to you a little bit about those different areas that we've been working on today. So Hawaii is known as the extinction capital of the world. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise given what I've told you so far and what you're already aware about as people who live here. There's a slight lag on things here. How did we get here? Well, historically, species had all of the Hawaiian Islands as far as the suitable habitat that would have been good for them. And we did things like clearing for sandalwood trade, clearing for livestock grazing, clearing for suburban and urban areas, clearing for plantation agriculture. So these are all land clearing, massive loss of habitat, types of things that we did over the last 300 years. Add to that all of the additional things that have happened over the last 300 years, the loss of pollinators, habitat altering invasive species, overcollection of things like the beautiful shells of the kahuli, disease such as avian malaria that's impacting the forest birds, and invasive predators and competitors. And that leads to what we call an extinction vortex in the conservation world, where populations that were already brought down to a very small size due to that loss of habitat then get hit by all of these additional factors that impact their survival and reproduction, and it causes them to essentially spiral down to nothing. Once you get down below somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 individuals, you're often in this extinction vortex, and most of our species are in that, right? Those numbers we're often more talking about 200s and 300s if we're lucky. So climate change increases pressure on this entire system by impacting survival and reproduction of the species, like we saw with the tree snails. So not only were those particularly juvenile snails, they're ectotherms. Ectotherms don't have a lot of wiggle room when it comes to temperature and precipitation and climate, and so they're the first to really get impacted when you have climate change happening. But it also is impacting all those invasive species, and in some cases allowing them to expand their suitable habitat, increasing predation and competition with our species. So the challenge that I like to focus my attention on is how can we transform into the recovery capital of the world? It's really easy to just descend into hand-wringing. These problems are overwhelming, they're monumental, and I really like to, while characterizing the challenges we're facing, simultaneously focus on pairing that with the solutions. So I'm going to speak to you about two things today. First of all, how can we take species from the brink of extinction, where more than 580 of our species are today, to growing and stable? And secondly, once we get them to growing and stable, how can we create thriving and responsive systems that help the species to achieve recovery? So if we go back to this framework, I'm going to start you off on the left side here, talking about effective conservation actions through some co-developed research that we've worked on over the last 4 years or so. So I want to introduce this idea. The actions that we can take to save endangered species differ in cost and benefits and efficacy. So we can think about one of the most well-known impacts to endangered species, which is rats. And we can simply put out a rat trap, and we can trap those or kill those rats, or we can put out a predator-free fence. And if we build the predator-free fence, it costs quite a bit more, but we're able to keep out rats, cats, mongoose, feral dogs, quite a few more things. It doesn't protect against everything. You still can have poeo or barn owls or other things going into that predator-free fence, but you've reduced all of the impacts from the mammals. But in most cases, we have many more than just rats that we're trying to deal with. So we have many more threats that we're trying to deal with. And not every action works the same for every species. So for example, thinking about kahuli, one of the things David Sisko would like everyone to be super aware of is if you go and control rats, you actually are controlling the invasive predator of an invasive predator that eats the snails. So if you think about mesopredator kinds of interactions, what happens when you get rid of the predator? All of a sudden, that population pops up, and now you have much bigger impacts on the tree snails themselves, as the rosy wolf snail is eating, the invasive rosy wolf snail is eating the kahuli. So we need to think not just about, oh, which one works better, which one costs more or costs less, or which one's more cost effective. We actually have to think about all the species we care about and know what the costs and benefits are across all of those species. This is a tall order. It's a hard job. How do we decide which actions to take when we have hundreds of species to protect across multiple regions? So there's a process that's been developed in New Zealand first, about 20 years ago, and then it's been applied in Australia, in Canada, and in Antarctica. And it's a process for how do we achieve stable populations of endangered species. You start by identifying the species that you want to work on. Which species are we going to consider for this process? What are the threats to those species? What are the strategies we can use to address each of those threats? And then we elicit the costs as well as the benefits of each of those conservation strategies. And then we do a process out of the business world called optimization or cost-benefit analysis. So this is a straightforward process looking just at basic costs and benefits. So we've applied this to Maui Nui with the process. I want to acknowledge all of my co-authors, as well as the funding, which came from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the Division of Forestry and Wildlife. And we had more than 100 participants and contributors, some of whom are online today. Again, I want to thank you for being here and for your contributions to this project. So we applied this to the 4 islands of Maui Nui. So keep in mind that these are actions across all 4 islands and the populations on them. And the managers wanted us to address this question for 372 species. This includes more than 200 species of plants, more than 170 species of snails, as well as species of insects and forest birds and bats. So basically all of the terrestrial species that are considered at risk of extinction. But that we would have been here for like the next 50 years if we had done PVAs for all of those species. So what we do is we group those into groups that respond similarly to conservation actions. So for example, all the water birds are grouped together, all the forest birds are grouped together. And even though within water birds, they might respond slightly differently to the conservation actions, their response is much more similar to each other than say the response of a plant group or something like that. So you can kind of get away with this to get a high level picture of how things are going to work. Next, we identified the different actions that would work to address these threats to these species. And again, we clumped them up into 27 strategies. The first strategy is a strategy of no action. It is absolutely critical that we ask the question, what would happen if we do nothing? And we need to be able to clearly communicate what happens if we do nothing. Secondly, there were 16 independent action sets. I'll show you briefly what those are in a moment. So for example, they might be all kinds of actions to address predators or something like that. And then typically we don't do just one action. We do a combination of things. So 10 were combinations of the independent action set. So that brings us to a grand total of 27 strategies. I'll show you briefly what those were, although I'm not going to dive in too deep. The top 3 in yellow are all strategies to address invasive ungulates. The next 2 in green are strategies to address habitat management, specifically in those areas where the endangered species occur. The next 5 are all about predator control. The 2 in blue are additional tools not covered by the other strategies that are specific to rare plants and invertebrates. And then the last 4 in peach are all about things for birds and bats specifically. So vertebrate-specific things for endangered birds and bats. And again, combinations of these are how we get to 27. So there were 10 combo strategies. These are the individual ones. All right. So next, once we work up those 27 strategies, and we've got our 15 species groups, next we want to know what is the benefit of each of those 27 strategies for each of the 15 species groups. Now, what do we mean by benefit? We defined it as probability of persistence. This is a fancy way of saying at 0, they're extinct. At 100, they're doing great and we can walk away. In most cases for endangered species in the Hawaiian Islands, we are absolutely thrilled if we can get them to 50. So that means they're stable. We can't walk away. They're definitely conservation reliant. We've still got to continue doing actions, but they're stable. And in fact, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has told us that they would probably delist once they hit 50 to 60. So that's what they consider enough to be quote unquote recovered. All right, and we wanted to know this over 20 years. Most of these species are endangered because they have very long, slow life histories. So it takes a long time for them to respond to those conservation actions. However, if we project it out to 100 years from now, none of us are going to be around. We can't imagine that far. So 20 years is a compromise between giving enough time for the conservations to actually have a benefit and short enough that we can all imagine maybe being there to help carry those actions across the finish line. All right. We did this using a modified Delphi method. I don't know, how many of you have run population viability analyses before, out of curiosity? Okay, there's a ton of input data needed. There's a ton of assumptions. There's a ton of modeling needed. If we did that for 372 species, we'd be like, what, 3 species in maybe on this process. So we use a modified Delphi method. If you want to hear a lot more about this, you can go talk to Mark Bergman, new director of School of Life Sciences, who has done a ton of work in this area to make sure that these methods are reliable. For each species group, we had 8 to 12 experts on that species group provide an independent estimate of the probability of persistence under each strategy over the next 20 years. You ask them 3 questions. You say, what's the highest plausible estimate you can imagine? What's the lowest plausible estimate you can imagine? This helps bound the uncertainty. When you guys are dealing with climate change, it's this whole world of possibilities and it's super overwhelming, but it's not the entire world that exists as a world of possibility. There is a bound on it. So you help bound that upper and lower spot. And then once you've got a smaller space for people to think in, you say, what is your best guess estimate of what this number should be? So for every species, under every strategy that you're an expert in, we ask you what's the highest possible estimate, lowest possible estimate, and most likely. This is really important. We then have an anonymous share out and discussion. We graph this out with just anonymous, person 1, person 2, person 3 who gave these answers, and then have a discussion together. Huge amount of value in this because it gives an opportunity for things like David to point out, like, hey, why are you guys giving such high marks for impacts on tree snails of doing that rat trapping? It actually should be below current status because that's actually going to injure them if you do rat control in places where there are rosy wolf snails, stuff like that. So then you allow people to re-elicit the values if they want to change them. So sometimes once they've had a discussion, they're like, oh, I didn't realize that, or oh, I misunderstood the question. Okay, so it's a chance to fix the numbers. Once you do that, you can have a lot of confidence. These kind of numbers actually hold up in court on things like HCP things and that kind of a thing. So if you follow this process. All right, so we wanted to know what's the benefit of each of the 27 strategies for each of this 15 species groups. Over 20 years, we first say, what is that benefit without action, if you do nothing in 20 years' time? And then if you take this particular strategy, what's the benefit you get of that strategy? All right, so now you've got a gain. So here's the first graph. This is the best we can do for each of these species groups if we apply the best strategy. If we implement the best strategy for each of the species groups, here's what we can get to. In black is if we do nothing. In blue is the best we can get to, and the white dot is where we are today. So what you'll notice is that without conservation actions, most species are below 10 to 40% persistence in 20 years. But we're doing better than that today. That's the good news. We're doing better than nothing. That's great. Although forest birds, let's see here, forest birds right here, pretty close to the same as doing nothing because we're just starting to get those tools implementable to address avian malaria. But the good news is with actions, we can increase persistence by 20 to 40% above the current status, reaching 40 to 60%. And just as a reminder, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would potentially delist at 50 to 60%. So we can see a pathway to get species to stable. That's really good news. And we have, I failed to mention it, but each one of those strategies that I mentioned, the 16 independent strategies, we have everything fully detailed, the number of tech positions, the number of admin, the proportion of admin time, the materials costs, the planning time and costs, all of that is in there. So it's incredibly detailed amount of information. So what about if we want to know which strategy performs the best across all species? So we know that there is a best strategy for each of the species, but what if we are trying to decide which actions to take and we want to know which ones do the best for across all species? So again, without action, with action, we have this benefit. So what we do is we take that benefit and we stack it for each of the species groups across all of the 27 strategies. Okay, takes a minute to get brains there. Okay, there we go. So that's the graph I'm going to show you next. So here we go. All you need to know about this for today's talk is that some strategies do better than others. Okay, so some strategies are great across the invertebrates, plants, and vertebrates. Other ones don't do so great across multiple species. But for example, I'm going to just point out S14 here really briefly, the tiniest bar on that chart. S14 is the strategy for existing tools for avian malaria. It's implementing like Wolbachia and stuff like that. So when I say existing tools, it was a stretch for forest birds because we're just starting to implement Wolbachia mosquitoes. But essentially, it has a huge benefit for forest birds. But there's only a handful of species this was applied to. So the bar is not very tall. But if you don't take that action set, that strategy, you lose the forest birds. And I really don't want to live in a world without EEV. So even though the bar might be short, it's really critically important to that particular species group, but it's important for us to know across the board which actions benefit multiple species groups. I want to highlight these ones on the far right. These are the only strategies that really combine existing and future actions. These are the ones that got us to that stable point, right? These are the ones that got us to that stable point. So here's the piece where I want to really embed this in your minds. If we go back to that list of individual strategies, these are the ones that aren't implemented yet. These are future ungulate fences, future predator exclusion fences, landscape scale rodent suppression or eradication on Ko'olawe, which is folks are already in the works of trying to plan something like that. Future tools for rare plants and invertebrates. The avian disease prevention, I would include it kind of as a future thing because we're starting to do it, but it's not at full scale. Things like building a wildlife rehab center on Maui so you don't have to constantly fly them to Hawaiian Islands, stuff like that. So these are all things that need an incredible amount of investment to get us to that stable point. I can't emphasize this enough. If we do the common conservation action tools available to us today of controlling rats, doing habitat management, now planting of common matrix plants, the common conservation actions that we do, if that is all that we do, we lose every one of those species, except for maybe bats. Maybe, it's a longer conversation. But all of these things need to be done. So that brings me to highlighting this aspect, which is diversified and sustained funding. I mentioned to you when I gave you the overview of the methods that we actually did identify costs, and I haven't talked to you yet about costs. So I want to take a moment to talk to you about the cost aspect of things. So what I'm about to show you is the cost of 20 years of conservation actions for 372 species across the 4 islands of Maui Nui. This includes research money for the things that need further development. It includes admin time, tech time, all of the materials, the vehicles, the fence building. It's a lot, okay? So that dollar value is $1 billion. You and I are freaked out by that number. My team presented this work at the Society for Decision Professionals in DC in April. It's a room full of business people, healthcare professionals, military, the people who are innovating in the field of decision analysis. They do not blink an eye. They're like, wait, can you clarify, is that for 1 year? That's 20 years of actions? That's 20 years of jobs, materials, everything? Why haven't you solved this yet? Like, why is that a problem? There's such a disconnect between the numbers that people in the business world are used to looking at and that flow through any given business on any given year, and the numbers that we're used to dealing with in the conservation world. And we have to stop apologizing for what it takes to get this job done. One of the reasons is because we're growing from 8 billion to 12 billion people on the planet by end of century. Every one of those people needs a job. More than 50% of the annual costs are going into jobs. So that's job security for people in the future across our Hawaiian Islands. Secondly, we can look at the non-recurring costs. These are broken into ungulate and predator fences, disease research and development, largely for the avian malaria issue, field vehicles, ko'olave predator eradication, policy development, and propagation and rehab facilities. So this is about between $67 and $100 million, depending on how you look at it. We do have the error bars elicited on this. What I've been told is that this is actually really good news because people like putting their name on stuff. So if it's a wildlife rehab facility, you can get Oprah or Zuckerberg or somebody to donate, and it's the Zuckerberg Wildlife Rehab Facility or whatever, right? These are the kinds of things that donors can put their names on, and so they're easy to fundraise for. So that's the good news for this kind of stuff. People, again, didn't blink an eye at this kind of a thing. So how do we diversify funding? The current funding mechanisms largely are state funds, federal funds, and private, nonprofit, and corporate donors. When folks ask the question, what are we currently spending today? Actually, nobody knows. So one of the things I need to find a grad student to do over the next few years and funding to do it is what are we currently spending and where is it coming from? So we understand the gaps better. Potential funding mechanisms, though, that I can see are, there's a lot of people exploring the potential for green fees right now, as well as conservation banking. I think there's a bill actually going before the legislature this spring for a conservation banking measure. I sit on ESRC, the Endangered Species Recovery Committee, which reviews like the habitat conservation plans for the wind farms, that kind of a thing. They proposed something to us to try to get ahead of things on HCPs. Again, a longer conversation for another time, but essentially conservation banking is a way of potentially getting ahead of things on the HCP side. Carbon credits are something that we're underutilizing. It's complicated. There's a reason why they're not being implemented largely in the Hawaiian Islands, but I think there's a lot of potential there. The corporate kuleana programs and expanded external donor programs. So at this point in the project last February, I went, oh shoot, I've reached the end of what I can do with my PhD in biology, and I decided I needed an MBA. So tonight I've got my first accounting final exam in the MBA program. So I'm trying to more seriously look at these things with understanding the biology side, but also trying to bridge better over onto the finance side. So I do want to mention community. So I haven't spoken about community yet, and yet nothing happens without working with community. I'm going to mention just a couple of things today. The first thing is when we think about all of those actions, again, we've had a really in-depth look at which actions are needed to quote unquote save species over the next 20 years. There's a number of actions that are critical to preventing extinction that actually require island-wide community contributions and engagement and participation. Things like lo'i restoration, forest restoration, keeping your cats inside. All of those things take community engagement to make them happen. On the other end of the spectrum, I'd like to suggest that I think there's an important role for government because there's specialized technology, permits, and skills needed for things like mosquito control. This just isn't something we can do at scale with community, but we do need community consent to do it, and community needs to be engaged in the process. Recognizing that there's really deep questions to ask about appropriate community engagement, we worked with a number of folks. There's a much longer list than this, but these are the folks who are most heavily involved in both the proposal writing and the report writing. But Amy Sato gave a fantastic presentation November 13. Happy to share the link with anyone who'd like. And I wasn't able to get the report the clicker thing. Anyways, the thing where I could provide the report easily to you at the end of the presentation. But again, happy to email that to you if anyone wants it afterward. So we ran a workshop at the Hawaii Conservation Conference a few years ago on Hawaiian cultural values and protocols for common terrestrial conservation actions, and had more than 100 participants that contributed to thinking really deeply. We have folks in this room who helped run it. And so really exciting to have that come out, and Amy's like totally open to continuing to update that and make it a really living document for how to appropriately engage communities. And of course, folks are asking, why just terrestrial actions? Well, we were focused on that for this project, and so we were thinking deeply about that. And there's a whole broader host of things to think about when you go into the coastal realm. And so there's more work needed in that area. As everything, this is a stepping stone to what needs to be done next. So in this first part, we've talked a bit about how we can take species from the brink of extinction to growing and stable. And personally, after completing this work, I can see a pathway to making it happen. It's not easy. There's funding needed, there's community engagement needed, there's policy development needed, but there's a pathway to getting there. I can see it's possible. In the second part, I want to talk to you briefly about how we create a thriving and responsible system to achieve recovery in Aina Momona. So how do we get from stability to thriving? So I would suggest that if we want to get to that next level, the lens through which we view the world has to change. We cannot view the world the way we have and expect things to be different. Dr. Winter, Kavika Winter, who I know has probably spoken for you folks before, I was chatting with him a few years ago, and he was asking me, why do you keep talking about preventing extinction? And it was soon after I had lost the kahuli, and I was like, what do you mean? You know, like, all I can think about is preventing extinction. We don't have the money, the tools, the resources to even think beyond preventing extinction. Like, you got to get rid of Euglandina rosea at a landscape level if you want to do that. Like, that's not, there's nothing even on the horizon for that. And he said, well, if you can't picture it, you can't get there, right? If you can't actually envision abundance and these things occurring on the landscape again, Evie in my backyard, right? If you can't envision it, you can't make it happen. And so this concept of a scarcity mindset, a pervasive feeling of not having enough, is so firmly embedded in the conservation world. We are a triage field. It's a 50-year-old field born out of a scarcity mindset, a pervasive feeling of not having enough. And so we have a paper where we explored this more deeply. I'll just mention that, give a shout out to that with a couple, with Dr. Winter, and then also Dr. Anne-Marie Jackson, who's a Maori professor from Aotearoa, who worked with us on this special issue, Transforming Conservation Biology Through Indigenous Perspectives. And this was the title article that they worked on to kind of think more deeply about how we do this transformation from a scarcity mindset to one of abundance, and thinking about how we get there. So I'd encourage you to check that out. But one of the things more recently that I've been thinking about is that I think the questions from like a research perspective that we ask are different to recover species than to than preventing extinction. It's fundamentally different research. And if we, like, worldview is, it's the air we breathe, it's pervasive. We don't even know we have these worldviews, right? So if we don't recognize that and step out of it, kind of like when Dr. Winter asked me that question, right? If we don't recognize that and step out of that space and say, oh, I've never wondered why I'm just talking about preventing extinction, not about achieving recovery, then we can't get there. So I would like to suggest that the actions needed to prevent extinction are different from those that achieve recovery due to three things. And these are just kind of beginning ideas that I'm starting to wrap my brain around and not fully developed yet. But I think it's due to three things. One is scale, the second is technology, and the third is feasibility. And so there's two areas of this I'd like to explore with you that I think we need to resolve if we wish to grow populations of endangered species from stable to thriving. I kind of imagine that, like Dr. Hadfield, who I did my postdoctoral fellowship under, going to be working till my mid-80s at least on all of these things. And so I figure 20 years to get to those stable populations, and another 20 years to think about how we get to thriving. But I don't know that I get to see EEV in my backyard in my lifetime. I think I can work with folks to help lay the foundation so that my great-grandchildren maybe can experience that. But we have to start here and we have to start working toward it, so that's a possibility. So the two areas that I think we need to work on, first is expanding from a focus on state and federally managed lands and employees to all lands and communities. And second is a shift from kipuka-focused conservation in small predator-free fences or small areas with predator control, which frankly is all we can do right now. That's what we have to do to hold on to them. If we try to do it at a landscape scale now, we don't have the money, we don't have the resources, we're going to fail and they're going to disappear. We have to do those predator-free fences and the captive rearing and all those things to hold on to them. But once we get them to thriving, we have to expand to landscape level threat eradication. I'd like to suggest that you don't get to see EEV in your backyard unless you get to that level. So just two quick thoughts I want to have on this. One is, and this is where I kind of am trying to start laying a theoretical basis for understanding these broad ideas that I think are the root of where we've got to get to. The first one is fortress conservation and the problem of diminishing returns. So I think folks in this room are probably familiar with the problem of fortress conservation, where we essentially say we've got this area that is it's a protected area, and we focus all of our state and federal funds on protecting this area. We don't let anybody else in. It can only be employees because we got to limit the human impact on this area. And frankly, if you do that, you're going to top out at a certain population size because of the concept of carrying capacity. So I was sitting in the Hell Week of business classes at the beginning of the semester, 13 hours, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. for like 4 days in a row before the semester even started. It was brutal. And it was like 7 p.m. on day 4. And I think my brain was just trying to bring this back to things that I could get excited about. And so they were talking to us about the problem of diminishing returns. So let's say that you build a factory, you've built your factory, you start hiring people, and those people are able to start specializing on tasks. And so you get more and more efficient as you hire more people and your productivity is going up and you're growing. Eventually, people start bumping elbows. Right? You're continuing to hire people, it's continuing to be more productive, but they're starting to bump elbows. And eventually your efficiency is actually going to go down. Your productivity is going to go down because people are just crowded. They can't do their work anymore. What do you need to do at that point? Build another factory. This blew my mind. I don't ever get to think in that space. What do you mean? Species are so abundant that people are like calling them invasive? Okay, this is a thing. People worry about endangered species that are recovering becoming invasive. It's like they're native. They used to thrive across the landscape. They've got to reestablish whatever competitive dynamics and stuff they had before. It's going to take a bit, right? But so if we apply that to recovery, if you want to recover species, you need more populations in more areas. You don't get that without thinking outside of fortress conservation. You have to partner with communities. And so we published a paper in 2021 where we partnered with folks who are in the sea level rise world and looking at indigenous agricultural restoration and kind of worked to put all of these ideas together, looking at how much waterbird habitat was going to be lost due to sea level rise, but how much we could gain from restoring indigenous agriculture. We are likely to lose about 30% of waterbird nesting habitat by the end of century due to sea level rise. We can gain 130% of waterbird nesting habitat by restoring indigenous agriculture in Lo'i. When we tried to publish this paper, we ran into, frankly, straight racist reviews. What? Indigenous people are the ones who killed all the waterbirds. What do you mean? Okay, yes. Yes, okay. So recognizing that there was a lot of work to be done in just helping folks recognize the dynamics that have occurred over the last 300 years with water diversions and loss of people taking care of place and the introduction of additional rat species and cats and mongoose and all the things that have devastated our waterbirds, right? So there's a lot of work to help build understanding. We have super exciting work that's continuing to grow in this space, and I'm excited to present it to you in future years. as we start to expand documentation of how lo'i are working for water birds. But I want to emphasize that this is, again, on that end of the spectrum where there's no reason water birds should be endangered. If you restore lo'i, there's no reason water birds should be endangered. You're feeding people and you're having thriving water bird populations. So easy win into the next century. I want to finish off by just mentioning that second area that I think we have to get to if we're going to expand and recover and have thriving populations. So I want to suggest that when we think about threat eradication, and we shouldn't be using the word eradicate unless it's gone, right? People often will talk about eradicating within fences. That's not a thing. You're just suppressing them or, temporarily getting rid of them inside the fence. But threat eradication means they're gone from the Hawaiian Islands. These are really thorny areas. I'm not telling you I have solutions, but I am telling you that, for example, I don't think you get there without I think there's gene drive technology is one of the only things that I can see at the moment that gets rid of mosquitoes, for example. I'm not saying that we should do it. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm just saying everything else is suppression. It's localized suppression like a rat trap. And you have constant incursion. So again, I don't know that that's the work of my lifetime, but I think laying the foundation for saying, what does it look like to have species thriving across the landscape? What are the tools and options available? There's so much innovation needed in that space, and a lot of policy work to be done as well. So I just want to highlight that as an area ripe for a lot of deep thinking, and we have to think before we do the research. I think we're just at the thinking stage. So I want you to start by, I want you to imagine with me the future that you want to live in. I would love to hear EEV in my yard someday. I might have to move to Hawaii Island for that, but even that's going to take some work. I'd love to be able to introduce my kids to kahuli in the wild someday. What's the future you want to live in? What species are there? How abundant are they? What does the landscape look like? How far do you have to go to see the species that you love? What does that future look like? I'd like to suggest that we are here. We are not responsible for the decisions that led to the world that we live in today, but we are at a point in history where the decisions that we make are going to determine the world that we live in the future. Yesterday, my students kind of blew my mind in class by talking about how we shouldn't be using ChatGPT and generative AI because of the water usage per search. Someone's done the research on how much water it uses per search when you ChatGPT something. It's terrifying. And I think we're at this point in history where, just like medicine, you don't even think about what it took to produce the things that allow you to have the medical care you have, or to use the phone that you have, and all the impacts on the world. Those decisions were made about 300 years ago, right? And then innovated over time. And why wouldn't you do all the things that save people, right? And I think now we're at another turning point I didn't expect to be in if you had asked me a year ago, where we have massive changes on the horizon. And we have a lot of questions we need to answer about where we go from here. So I look forward to working with you. In an era filled with uncertainty, our solutions need to be as big and as multidimensional as the challenges we face. And so I look forward to working with all of you in all of these areas as we work for transforming the Hawaiian Islands from the extinction capital of the world to the recovery capital of the world in the coming years.
Join me in a round of applause. Thank you, Melissa. We have about 10 minutes for questions. I'm not seeing any of the chat at the moment. I do welcome folks online to raise your virtual hand under the, I think it's the React button there on your Zoom controls, or just go ahead and come off mute too if you have a question. I see maybe Kim Shea coming on maybe with a question.
Thanks, Melissa. That was awesome. There's so many awesome things from your presentation today. But I don't know, I guess just to be that person, what if you had $2 billion or even $3 billion? But I guess that was something I really took away, that we're working in this scarcity mindset, or just the bare minimum to keep things going and to protect things at a bare minimum level. And you're right, it's just, I don't know, maybe better words for this, but $1 billion is chump change in the business world. So thanks for highlighting that. And yeah, maybe to you and the whole group, I'd love to know, like, what would you do with 2 billion then?
I mean, Kim, you're helping us look out for plants, which is a huge area. Like, there's so much bang for the buck in the stuff you can do for plants. You get so much out of small investments. Do you have ideas about what you would do? What's the first thing you would do?
That's great. You put it back on me.
You're the expert.
Well, and I guess I know, partners that have existing plans and things like that that aren't, funded 100%, including my program. But I think more than anything, I would go back to what our mindset and outlook is and change it from bare minimum to what is landscape level thriving. So maybe I'd go back to planning in a way and change it to what is thriving rather than bare minimum.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Kim. Yeah, I think one of the things that came through as we talked with folks over the last 4 years is the importance of the captive propagation facilities are a really concrete thing that is a huge benefit. We've got to be able to have those places where we're not only storing seeds, but propagating plants to be able to put back on the landscape, but then also innovating in addressing the pile of challenges that are facing the plant world, such as the insect pests. I mean, we do a terrible job of controlling ants, right? Just the most basic tiny things that we all struggle with in our houses. Now imagine if those are killing the plants that you put out into the field. I mean, and how hard it is to just get rid of them in your house, let alone, if you're in a wild environment. So these are not things that we have perfect answers for, but as you know, there's a lot of things that with funding, we could be doing so much better to be able to provide a better basis for all of these species to thrive into the future. I'd like to have that problem of having double the money.
Mahalo.
Question, was it a question in the room here?
Yeah, is this like this? Cool, thank you. This was even better the second time, Dr. Price. Thank you so much for presenting again. And having seen it second time, noticed different things, I wanted to ask a methodological question and a conceptual question.
Yep.
So regarding the methodology, there was an earlier slide, arguably the most important one, depicting how a combination of different methods resulted in the largest increase in resistance. I wanted to ask why only those combinations were chosen, because at least from my angle, I thought, well, why aren't you combining all of those combinatory methods into one big bar that has all of the additive increases in resistance together? Is that making sense?
Yes. Just wrapping my brain around how to respond.
Yeah.
So I didn't show the combinations. It gets really messy when you try to show what those combinations are. In a nutshell, the way that the 10 combinations were selected is thinking about if you're managing to maximize for the forest birds, or let's put it on the hat of a forest bird manager, what's the combination you would typically do? Because we want to know what are the co-benefits for the other species as well as the benefits for that group. But essentially, yeah, what was absolutely overwhelming, I think, particularly for the plant folks, is that the answer is you have to do everything, which makes sense. We asked them for these strategies. We said, what do you need to do to get them to stable? They told us, we worked them up, right? So it makes sense. It's all the things they can imagine doing. And what do you know? Those are the things that grow them. So I do think, maybe underline your question, I do want to say there were some that essentially include everything.
Sure.
And yes, those do work the best.
Okay.
So those are represented on that graph. Yeah, so those were included.
Sure.
Why you don't just do every possible combination is that we are using expert elicitation to get these results. It took us a year. These sheets take about 45 minutes to fill out. But I cannot emphasize enough the emotional difficulty in doing that when you're the people managing the species. So sure, just fill it out. 45 minutes, so easy. You can get it done in a day. You're having to sit there and think deeply about all the different actions you take and what those responses are going to be. And that's emotionally hard because some things that we think work really well in reality don't move the bar very far when taken alone. But to stack all those things up in your head, figure out how do those combine, right? So we didn't want them to be there forever. So we chose a select number. That's one of the things about decision analysis. It's actually not the whole world of possibilities that matter. The goal is insights, not answers. We're not looking to tell people exactly what to do. We're trying to give them the insights they need to get unstuck and move forward.
Cool. Thank you. And then the other question I had is, as someone who's taking your NREM 701 class, I think it was really cool to see your life goals project, but I'm comparing the life goal diagram we did at the start of this semester versus the one you presented today. And I wanted to ask you, if you were in my shoes and you had to do a life goals project at the start of your graduate career, how would it have looked different from the one that you showed us today?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's easy. I mean, I started off as a high school science teacher, middle school and high school science teacher. The question that I've always asked, because I was a biology major and, you know, explored going into medicine, all different pathways. And the question I always ask is, where can I make the biggest difference with the skills and interests that I have at that particular point in my life? So starting out, I didn't want to just see people for 15 minutes every 6 months. So I went into teaching. From there, worked on the graduate degree, it rolled into a PhD, and what do I do with that? Well, you know, started down those pathways. So I think at each stage, the question you have to ask is, you know, what are my interests? Where do I want to make a difference? What are the problems I want to help solve? Talk with the guy beside you. A lot of really neat stuff as far as that goes. What problems are you interested in solving? And then what are my next steps to gain those skills? And then walk through doors as they open. There's definitely, I could not have imagined being where I am today. My interests have grown and changed over time as my skills, access to people, front row seat to all of these amazing people and what they do. And just saying, okay, I'm sitting here in the ivory tower with no real power to actually make a difference in the real world. I have no authority to solve any of these problems. Let's be real. I can do the research to support them that they don't have the luxury of time to do. Where can I be most useful? And sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. I think this is going down the right path, but it does ask a lot of the managers, their time in forming things up. And hopefully when we hand it back to them, it's useful. We're still figuring out how to make it as useful as possible. It's a long answer to a short question.
No, it was a good one.
And I don't know if we're out of time or if you had it.
We're at the hour. We should wrap it up. If folks want to chat and you're able to stick around a little longer, we can afterwards.
Happy to do so.
One more round of applause for Melissa. Surprise, thank you very much. We welcome you all to join us at our next Slice of PI-CASC seminar, which is going to be Tuesday, January 14th, as usual, noon here in Hawaii, in this room and online. Information on that seminar will be coming soon. If you have a recommendation for a future seminar, future guest to come talk to us, please come talk to us, or there will be a survey, I believe, that pops up after you log off of Zoom. Some of our speakers this fall have come through those surveys, so please share your recommendations. And those of you here, stick around. We do have a pie for a slice of pie from Rachel. And thank you, Rachel, for continuing to coordinating our seminars and baking for us. So thank you. Look forward to seeing you after the new year at the next Slice of PI-CASC. Everybody have a good holiday. Thank you.